So welcome everybody. My name is Ali Shapiro and I joined Dreamers and Doers, I think in November, December. And I'm also the host of the Insatiable podcast, my podcast that I've had for a little bit over 2 years. And it's done really wonderful things for my business. And I was asked today to just share a little bit about best practices, best lessons learned, resources. So I'm going to go over why podcasting, the benefits, the best way to grow your podcast, and then lessons learned. And I hope to get that all done within like 20 to 30 minutes so then I can just answer your questions, because I find that's often where we get the most value. So today I'm first going to start off with why podcasting. And I'll weave my story in because often examples help. But the most important reason to start a podcast is to have a clear focus. It doesn't matter what yours is, but the focus of your podcast will determine so much of your strategy. So when I started mine about 2 years ago, I actually had a co-host, which I'll get into how that changed the strategy. And we just wanted to start talking about, my podcast Insatiable is about women's holistic health, but it really brings like a research-based approach. I created my own intellectual property in graduate school at Penn called Truths with Food. And so much of what I see around the diet, lifestyle, women's holistic health. You either have people who are very Western medicine and they don't believe in anything holistic, or you have these people who are completely holistic and don't have any research or evidence to back up what they're saying. And the answer is usually, the answer is it depends. And there's a lot of great people, practitioners out there who don't have quite the following or whatever because they're giving a more nuanced perspective on our health, from physical therapy to depression, et cetera. So I really wanted to host this third conversation that I felt wasn't happening. And I had a co-host at the time who was a trainer. She was also a former client of mine, so we had a great rapport. And we just wanted to get the conversation out. However, without that focus, it really became a lot. We were doing a lot more labor-intensive stuff than we probably needed to for the return. So I think it's really important for everyone to have a clear focus. And mine was definitely to grow my business. I'm in the coaching, education, adult development space. And as a coach, I'm selling intimacy. And there's nothing more intimate than someone listening to you for an hour and really feeling like they're learning to trust and know you. Other people will use their podcast to grow their network. I'll get into one of the benefits of it is that you really can grow your network. You're offering a lot of value add to people to have them on the podcast. It's a great piece of content for them. But some people do it to grow their network. Other people want to write a book. And so it's to grow their platform. And so you can, and again, some of these reasons overlap, but having a clear focus will determine, for example, the format, right? If you're trying to, for me, I wanted to use it to grow my business my sales is a very educational sales approach. So I wanted to be able to teach people. So I usually need 45 to 60 minutes to really go in depth in a conversation. Some people who are just using it to grow their platform, they want to do 30-minute segments, and because it's just about the touch point. And you can obviously change as you go, but going into it, having a clearer strategy can often save you a lot of work. Some people do 15-minute episodes because it's just about those touch points. So really figuring out your main focus can help you then make a lot of other decisions that will be really strategic. The other reason that I think it's important is unless you have an existing platform, this is not going to be an overnight success. The space is more crowded. Unfortunately, the bros, I say the bros, tend to have the most popular podcasts, the Tim Ferrisses of the world, et cetera, because that's kind of the common narrative that we have. So they're kind of playing into that, overnight success, entrepreneurial stories, or, hacking growth, versus, at least in my space, the health space, I'm saying the answer is complicated. Everyone's unique. It's a much different approach. And this isn't a bad thing that your podcast won't be an overnight success. You will develop your voice as you go. I even look back at some of those beginning episodes and I don't cringe, but I'm like, oh, I would have said that so differently based on how people have responded to it. And so I also think that's really important for people if they're afraid to get started. They think it has to be perfect. Part of why people go to podcasts is the meandering nature of them, usually. And one of some of the big feedback that we got when I had a co-host in the beginning was people just felt like they were listening to their girlfriends. They're like, I feel like I'm in this like really interesting conversation I wish I had when I went out on Friday night. And so they like the kind of back and forth rather than it being super polished. And again, that will depend on what your goals are. But for us, selling, for me, again, as a coach and I don't call myself a coach, but as someone who's selling a really intimate product, that was really important to me, and service. So yeah, and unless you already have a large following, the podcast will grow your following, but it's going to be much more slow and steady. And I share that because a lot of people get into podcasting thinking they can monetize right away. And sometimes you can if you have that existing following. But most of the time now, especially as the metrics in the podcasting space get more and more fine-tuned, like it used to be, people would just measure downloads, and advertisers would accept that. And now they're able to tell when people drop off on an episode. Are they fast forwarding through the commercials? So as the medium gets more fine tuned, so does the advertising space. And that's not to say that if you don't have a really good like niche and you have really good products, or there are adjacent products and sponsors that you couldn't get them right away. But usually it takes a lot longer than people think. So if you're trying to make money from your podcast, that's going to be a longer path, unless from an advertising perspective, unless you already have a huge following. And again, for me, I was really doing it from a content marketing perspective. My clients tend to be women who are multitasking, working in the real world, trying to learn. They're big researchers, but the podcast medium gives them the ability to multitask. They can listen to it while they're walking to work, taking the subway, while they're cleaning, doing laundry, etc. So it was a really great medium for me in my strategy because it was able to illustrate my expertise. Rather than just kind of, in my space, it's a lot of fluff. It's a lot of like overblown promises. And so what I found is when people come to me to join my group programs or to work with me privately or to hire me to speak. I've started consulting for some healthcare companies. I've sent them some of the episodes. This is really, for me, my content marketing. And I think it's a great content marketing strategy for people who have deep expertise, or you have an audience that really likes storytelling and really likes being informed. And I've also found, again, like I said, sometimes a main goal for people, but it's really expanded my network. It's so tremendous. To be able to reach out to someone and say, hey, I want to give you a platform and introduce you to my audience. For me, I've taken a lot of time to build trust with my audience. So whoever comes on there, they tend to follow them, and it's really a win-win for everyone. So some of the benefits of podcasting, for the start, it gives you a lot of credibility. I'm a podcast, you become a curator in essence. And I think, what does Twitter do? What does Facebook do? It curates for us. We're so overwhelmed now that when you, as a podcast co-host or as a host, become a curator, people really start to trust that. Again, it can grow your network. I talked about that with you. I've interviewed some really big names who in my field, like some depth psychologists and some really great authors who I was intimidated to pitch them, but I did a really concentrated pitch and they said yes. And it's been really amazing. I've only had one person say no to me, and it's just because their book just came out. But it's a really great way to develop a relationship. Another thing, sharpening your voice. So if you do want to work on a book or you are speaking, you will get tremendous feedback from, I keep using the word tremendous. Oh my God. The lexicon of this regime has entered my mind. I've gotten a lot of great feedback from my community about, hey, when you said this really resonated with me, or this gave me language. And I'm using that kind of stuff when I write my book now. So it's really great. And if you do want to write a book, it's fantastic piece to write into your book proposal about a platform. it's also just a huge educational tool for people. My existing clients will go back and listen to certain lessons, or they will bring to me questions from the podcast, or they will tell me that the podcast helps reinforce what they are learning in our coaching sessions. And I also give them experiments and skill sets to develop. So it becomes a really great tool for clients to reinforce what you're doing if you're in that kind of business model. And then also, if you do decide to do transcripts with your podcast, it's great for SEO. Google really rewards really meaty blog posts. And so for me on my blog, which then everything that I write to my list becomes about my podcast to get more people to do that. I do pay to get transcripts made. And when you put that on your website, that when you have a transcript, a podcast running, as well as some text, a photo, that ranks really high in SEO in terms of to help you with bring that to your website and to your business in terms of visibility. So those are some of the big benefits. And of course, I'm sure there's more, but those are some of the main ones people do it. So how to grow your podcast? Because at the end of the day, you want to grow your podcast so that you're really leveraging all of the content, the great content that you've created. So one of the big things you can do is turn it into quick and easy blog posts. And then, you can pitch those to other people. And so then you click, for more information, listen to the podcast. So that's one way to grow your podcast. Word of mouth, like all businesses, is going to be really big. I've had people tell me that they heard about my podcast at Weight Watchers, and they stopped going to Weight Watchers and now listen to my podcast. And these are people in cities that, I've never really had a huge presence in, like Atlanta, like Texas, all this stuff. I lived in Philly for 12 years, lived in New York, and mostly have had the coasts, but it really spreads that way. And it's really fascinating to hear that, how people do that. So on your podcast, you can also remind people to share it with people. I think one of the biggest barriers to people listening to podcasts is they just don't know how to find it on their phone. So you can often, tell people on your podcast, this is how you can share it with someone. And that's also how you can help your list to make word of mouth easier, because word of mouth is going to be huge. It always is. Another huge way to grow your podcast is to go on other people's podcasts. And, you need to learn to pitch properly. I often and I could do a whole other webinar, I used to be in PR, on how to pitch properly. But to give you kind of the quick and dirty, I've gotten so many pitches, people pitching me, and all they do is tell me about themselves. And they tell me why they're so different. And they basically repeat what I do in my work. They don't tell me where our work intersects. So you always want to listen to a couple of episodes of a podcast. And this is whether you have a podcast or not, or you're pitching to be on podcasts, because podcasts do convert really, really well, like much better than national TV, even online publications. I've been on national TV. I've done all kinds of press in my business, and podcasting has been the best conversion, I would say, because it gets to your right client. They know people can really self-select. Which is really cool. But going on other people's podcasts and telling them where your work intersects is so important to getting on other people's podcasts, rather than just pitching all about yourself. Another way to grow your podcast is to ask your listeners to leave reviews. The algorithms are mysterious and changing at times, but the more reviews you have, the more likely someone is to come to you, search for your podcast, and then say, oh my God, it's just groupthink. It happens to all of us, no matter how independent and rebel we think we are. It's like 1,000 people reviewed this podcast, or 75 people have reviewed this podcast. But the cool thing is then the testimonials you can put on your website and you can use for marketing content anywhere because it's public. And Another way that people grow their podcast is create a Facebook community around it. I have not done that because I just don't, it often involves a lot of work. You get a lot of people who want free advice. It doesn't work for my business model, but a lot of people have created really robust communities around their podcast. And there is a way to, create community to create clients and whatnot. If that's your goal, if you want to write a book and that's your platform, then having that is a great leverage to go to a publisher who wants to see that you have a built-in audience. And stuff like that. So you can build a Facebook community around your podcast to grow it. Another way is to engage with your listeners on social media. I will often post about an episode on a social media card, and some of my listeners, I always ask them to follow me at the end of every episode. And people will reach out to you, and that's huge. And they'll say, "I love this episode because of blah 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 blah," or they'll ask a question, and then more people see that conversation, and then they subscribe. I had one woman. I interviewed Dr. Terry Walls, who's this amazing physician who was diagnosed with MS. She tried everything conventional, even chemotherapy. Nothing was working. She basically reversed her MS using diet and lifestyle. And she's now doing research to develop her own evidence-based protocol around this for people who have MS, lupus, other autoimmune diseases. But I interviewed her, and she's done hundreds probably of podcasts now, but someone in her network, so she shared it, which I'll get to another way to grow your podcast is to have guests with big followings. She shared the episode, and someone in her community said, "Dr. Walls, I've listened to all your episodes, and this episode was the best one you've ever done. To me, you just were so excited. I loved hearing about this." And so I just screenshotted that and shared that. And then other people wanted to listen because, whoa, this is one of the best ones she's ever done. And so engaging with people on social media, and that woman ended up becoming, an insatiable listener because I reached out to her and she was so excited that I shared her testimonial. So that can really start to develop community and grow your podcast as well. Another big one is having people who have big followings be on your podcast. Again, most people will say yes if you admire their work. If it doesn't mean that you're going to just tell them they're great. My podcast is very much a debate and discussion podcast. So people may not know that. It doesn't mean I'm going to challenge any of their beliefs, but it's going to be more of a back and forth. And I found that if you really do your research, people will say yes. And then when you interview them and you can bring out something new that hasn't been spoken before, they will be so excited to share it. And again, you want to make it easy for them to share. So I always send "Hey, it was great having you. Here's an easy way to share on Twitter, on Facebook." And there's a great app. It's called Wave, WAAVE, that really gets engagement. It enables you to just take a snippet of the audio of your podcast, and it creates a social media card for you. And on that social media card is like a pulsing audio. And people can't help but click on it. So they click on it and they get 30 seconds. You could do 30 seconds, you could do 2 minutes, but it really engages people to want to listen to more. And when you send that to people with large followings, especially, then their listeners click on it, and it becomes a really quick way to get people to say, "Oh, I want to listen more." But having people with big followings, in the beginning, I was really just kind of a purist about, I want to have the most expert person on there. And as I've realized that I need to grow my podcast so that I get new subscribers, et cetera, I've really found that sweet spot between people who have engaged followings, not just big followings to have big followings, but really engaged, loyal followers, and have invited them on. And again, most people say yes. And some of those people will become big subscribers, and other people will just, they'll follow you on social media and maybe later come to subscribe. But that's a really big way to grow. Another thing that defined with growth that kind of dovetails with SEO is finding topics that your audience or audience that you would like to have is already searching, and then do a podcast topic on that. So for example, really kind of the stage before people come find me, they'll try Whole30. Whole30 has really grown in popularity the past couple of years. I happen to have done it back in 2012. And we had a listener write in and say, "Hey, what do you guys think of the Whole30, given you have this nuanced view and you also honor the emotional side of food, et cetera?" And so we did an episode on the pros and cons of the Whole30. And that episode has like 6 times the downloads of everything else we've done. And it's gotten us so many more subscribers. People aren't necessarily looking to subscribe to another podcast, but they click on that episode. They've told me, I was Googling Whole30 and your episode came up and I started listening to it. And then I was like, oh my God, this is more what I needed of the emotional stuff, etc. So think of your industry and think of what people are Googling and use that as topics. And that's a great way for it to come up on a search engine. Another one I did is like why I quit Weight Watchers. And I brought a client on talking about like how she was done with that. And she wanted a holistic perspective, a food as medicine perspective. And she was like, I was way too smart to be doing this, but I was getting stuck on this. And so I shared her story. And again, when people Google like Weight Watchers or like frustration with Weight Watchers or whatever people are Googling, that episode comes up. So really using those SEO terms that people are already searching as titles can really just skyrocket your downloads. And I will say too, in terms of growth, downloads are only one number. I know some people who have tons of downloads and their podcast does not achieve the goals that they're looking for. I have, in terms of downloads, I'm probably in about the top 20% of all podcasts. However, once it has, like I said, really grown my business exponentially the past couple of years. And what's really fascinating is whenever someone comes from the podcast, they are the total right client for me. They're a dream to work with. They've already started letting some of these ideas marinate within them, so they're better clients. And they quote unquote convert really well. So I don't have to convince them. I don't have to because that's also not my style. I don't sell. I don't have a sales formula. The podcast does that for me because either people want to do this work or they don't. And I find the podcast allows them to come to it on their own terms because also my audience doesn't like to be sold to. They're pretty smart. They're pretty savvy. And so the podcasting really I use it as a content marketing educational tool to really help people self-select, which makes my job a lot easier. Okay, so a little more lessons learned, and then I'm going to turn it over to you guys. But some of the biggest lessons are formatting based on your goals. So like I said, I had a co-host when we first started. We didn't really have a clear focus. We were doing them every week. Sometimes even I have someone edit them and do transcripts, and we got 5 a month as part of what we were paying for. And we were just doing those 5 a month. And it got to be really exhausting. And now that I realize that my podcast I want it as content marketing, I've switched over to seasons, especially so switching over to seasons has enabled me to still generate really great content, but I don't have to do it as much. And now that I have a backlog catalog of 101 episodes, because we were doing it every week for a year and a half, almost 2 years actually. And then with this seasons one, now I am doing 7 for this season too. I have a huge theme around the season. I can have more fun. I love creating content. I know some people don't love it, but I love it. I love to research. I love to interview. So knowing that my goal is content marketing and growing the amount of people who know about my business, I can go to a seasons format. It's not going to change anything. If you are trying to monetize through advertising, that may affect things. So that's why it's really important in the beginning to have at least some sort of focus. It may shift or change. And the other big lesson, is so my co-host had to stop co-hosting because she was a trainer and they were trying to franchise their gym. And it wasn't a big deal, which is what I'm trying to say. Like, your podcast will shift and change. And in fact, she decided to leave shortly after, let me think. She decided to leave shortly after the 2016 election. And my intellectual property that I use is very feminist approach to women having agency over their body. And my co-host never wanted to discuss politics, even though women's health is very political. And I had to honor that. And then after she left, I was able to get much more into the cultural conditioning we have around how women are dismissed in the healthcare system. I was able to more freely speak about how upset I am about the current conditions in America. So I just share that because if you're thinking about having a co-host or not, it's super fun. It's great conversation. And you want to talk about that stuff ahead of time of what are your boundaries? What are you comfortable with? What are you not? And what's interesting is after she left, I'm sure I lost some people who also wanted a more fitness focus, but I was able to take a more feminist approach. And the cool thing is the people that are in my groups since that has happened have told me that they've really enjoyed the podcast a lot more since I'm going much deeper. So you're right, people will come with you, even as you switch and change. But I think if you're going to have a co-host, talk about that stuff up front. And then also taking time to pitch yourself to other podcasts. Most of my podcast growth has come from people listening to me on other podcasts. And that is easy to put on the back burner when you're only creating your own. But you can kind of create some leverage by inviting people who have who have bigger podcasts onto your podcast. Obviously, you want to have a genuine reason you want to talk to them and see where your work intersects. But that's kind of a way to do double duty and maximize your efforts. But really making time to pitch yourself to other people's podcasts is so, so important because, again, people are already listening to podcasts. It's very little friction for them to then subscribe to one more and stuff like that. So pay attention to that. And then I think it's really important to engage with people when they reach out. I don't know, we all have different audiences or different reasons that you're doing this, but my clients tend to not be big into sharing their whole lives on social media. They tend to be more introverted, more I'm going to observe. And so when they do reach out, I really make sure to respond. And they've become some of the biggest fans of my podcast. Like when I, again, promote the podcast on social media, those people that have reached out and I've responded back to, they will tag like 5 of their friends, like, you need to hear this episode. So really making sure that you engage with people because it really, for some people, it takes a lot to reach out to or just to comment on a post. And again, everyone's going to have a different audience, but that's one of the things that I found is really important. And then let's see. Oh yeah. And then in terms of metrics, it's really easy to only focus on the downloads. It's kind of like when people only focus on the weight or only on their revenue. But there are so many other metrics in terms of community engagement, people then becoming clients, growing your network. So that will all come back to your strategy, but it's really easy to focus only on the downloads. I think I heard that like some of the top podcasts, they're getting like millions of downloads a week, right? Like I'm nowhere close to that, but the podcast is still serving me. And it's getting a different perspective out there. And that changing the conversation as well as getting more clients is always important to me. And so I think as business owners or as people who are considering doing this, the competitors in us want to always compare and think that download numbers are the only thing that's important. But it's really not based on your strategy. And then I wanted to give you guys a really great free resource. There is a Facebook group called She Podcasts, and it's SHEPODCASTS. And it's totally free to join. And it's such a supportive community. And any questions you have, like Apple just turned over a new way to measure their downloads. And there was all these glitches and people were going in there and being like, how do I read this? How do I not? Have you ever pitched a guest and this has happened? Have you ever had an interview and it sucked and you didn't want to release it? Et cetera, et cetera. And it's just a really great community. I'm sure there's more out there, but I tend to do less is more. And I just tend to learn a lot from the questions people ask and try to contribute, similar to Dreamers and Doers. So that's all. Let's see. Oh, yes. Wait, I wrote something else. Yeah, I think it's really important for people just to start. And you can do seasons, you can do episodes, but it'll shift and change. But it's a really, really wonderful medium, especially if you're trying to build trust and relationships with people. It's I can't think of anything greater, and I really do feel like people are craving depth. And the podcast medium gives you the opportunity to do that, while also obviously bringing humor or whatnot. So I'm going to end my piece right there, and then open it up to questions. So if you're on the phone, you can hit *6, or if you are on the on Zoom, you can raise your hand, and I'm happy to answer. Yeah, go ahead, Erin.
Oh, hi. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I mean, this is like, consider me like a golden girl, okay? So like, how do you even, like, where do you even start? Literally, like, day one, like, what, like, I don't even know. I mean, I guess I could Google it, but like, what do you do to just start?
Great. So that's a great question. So I think the first thing is to come up with like 5 or 6 topics that you really want to go over, because they recommend that when you release your podcast, you should have about 5 already, because if someone comes and then they only have 1, it's like, oh, I want more, And so it starts to build that like, oh, I'm used to hearing Erin. So having 5 to 6 episodes that you can drop all at once is a really good strategy. The second thing is so podcasting is about audio. So you want to do the best sound quality you can. A lot of podcasters podcast from their closets. It's nothing fancy. It's just something that, like, this room right now that I'm in is my co-working space. It has no carpet, big ceilings, horrible for podcasting. But like when Juliet, who was my former co-host, she would literally go into her closet, and I was in a room with a ton of carpet. Now in my co-working space, they actually have soundproof like walls because it's a co-working space, and so I podcast from there. But you don't have to freak out about how great the audio quality is, but you definitely want to do it in as carpeted. Again, most people do it in their closet to start out with, because it sounds so much better that way. And are you on a Mac or are you on a PC?
I'm on a PC.
Okay. So you could use whatever, the built-in microphone there.
Yeah, I bought a microphone. So like someone had mentioned like, just a little clip-on microphone that can plug into the iPhone.
You could record it on your iPhone too.
But how do you even getting before that, where do you go to even start? Like, how do you even literally get started? Like the first thing you do from a technical standpoint, I guess.
Yeah. So define start to me. Like, you mean like you just literally hit record and then that's a podcast.
But you record.
Erin, do you mean like what do you use to record?
What do you use to record?
Okay.
Where are you recording it to? Where are you saving that file? How are you, like, where are you uploading that file? How are you, everyone has their little like square, like album cover type thing, and where is all that, like, how do you file it? How do you categorize it? Where, like, what platform, like what?
I got it. Okay.
Am I asking something?
No.
Can I also add, like, I'm not sure how to do guests, so this is kind of relevant too. That was the same question I had.
Yeah. Okay. So
now I don't feel so bad.
No, don't.
And there are a ton, I'm going to let Ali answer for sure, but I've done some research on this before this class, and there's a ton of articles. If you literally Google how to start a podcast, they run through kind of the top 5 things and have a wealth of information.
Okay, then I won't waste everybody's time.
No. Ali should answer, but like there is a ton of stuff online, and it sounds like this Facebook group would also be an amazing place.
Yeah. So, your cover art. So I use Libsyn. Libsyn is a hosting place where they will upload. Like it's basically like a server that will then feed to iTunes, but it can also feed to YouTube. So you take one file, which is going to be it could be an audio or a video, depending on where you record. But Libsyn will distribute. They're kind of like the distribution channel. And you can pick if you want it going to Google Play, if you want it to go to iCloud, if you want it to go to YouTube, if you want it to go to Spotify now, if you want it to go to iHeartRadio. So they are the intermediary that kind of pushes all of that out. They also show you, you can pay it it's like $20 a month for storage. I think there's some that you can do. There might be a plan that's a little bit less, but based on how much I'm doing, I do the $20 a month. You can see where people are downloading from. You can see what episodes on Libsyn are getting the most traction. But in terms of recording, if you record on your iPhone, you then save that file to your desktop. If you're recording on your PC or your Mac, like I record my podcast on Zoom that we're using right now. So I hit the recording button, and then afterwards, Zoom sends me an MP4 or like an M4 file. I have a company that edits my podcast for me because I just am not a tech person and I just don't want to spend that time. And they do an intro and an outro for me. Now some people have that format, some people do not. But all you need is one kind of audio file and you could literally set up your own podcast. So just think of a podcast as an audio clip, like where you're just kind of talking, and that's technically a podcast. In terms of art, you do need what do they call it? Not clip art, art like artwork for your show. We did not put a whole lot of effort into thinking about ours right now. I am going to change it. But it was just something, and I would recommend probably having your photo. That tends to be really good for people, is to have their photo, because then people feel like, again, podcasting is very intimate. So they're like, oh, I know this person. And there's different theories on how to make clip art, like the podcast art, but we just made it in Canva, which is free. And then we also, if you Google like free intro outro music, you can get resources that will give you free music. Sometimes you have to pay like $1. But if you want to have, I always recommend to people, like, listen to some of your favorite podcasts and see the format. What do you like about that? Do you like the intro? I mean, do you want a standard intro? Do you want a standard outro? Do you like that the person comes on and gives you some context for what they liked about the interview? But a podcast at its basic format is just an audio file. And then you get to dress it up and bookend it any way that you would like. So if you have a mic, you've got that hardware. Then you just have to hit record. And I tend to script out when it's just me doing like something I really want to talk about. I script it out, but then I tend to go, off track. When I'm interviewing someone, I have a list of questions and some points that I want to bring up, but then I just really let the interview take over. And so you hit start when you're ready, let it go on, and then you hit stop. And then again, if you want to do an intro and outro, you can then record an intro and outro and put that into GarageBand or PC, or you can hire someone on Fiverr, or you can, I use We Edit Podcasts I know some people do stuff in the Philippines. And you don't necessarily even need an editor. It all depends on like what's important, I think, to you. And I think it's most important to get started. Do you have more questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I had to wrap my head around. I'm like, oh my God, when we first started, I'm like, oh, a podcast is just an audio file. Like, that's, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I realized that, but then I was like, but what am I doing with that audio file? Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So can I just tag team into this just for
Please.
the getting guests? Like, how do you manage their audio component, or do you have them in the room with you?
That's a great question. So I don't think again, everyone's podcast is different, but I've never had the same person in the room with me. And so I ask people the best that they can to be in a room that, I mean, I actually don't put that many parameters on it. I do tell people like, hey, it sounds better if you're in a space that is smaller with carpet. But a lot of times the edit people that I send it to will balance that out. But a lot of people give people their guests clear, specific guidelines to hopefully, adhere to. But I don't know if that you'll be able to get it like all the time.
That's so helpful. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And don't be shy about asking it because people love being on podcasts.
Hey, Ali. And by the way, there was another woman that I took a class from that I'll share you guys notes on. It was a woman named Ayana Angel, and she taught I paid $35 on Eventbrite, and she taught us a virtual webinar. So first, you should be charging for this next time when you do it outside of Dreamers and Doers. Earning power for the ladies. But secondly, can you talk a little bit more about, I know you can use Fiverr or TaskRabbit or somebody else to edit the audio, because that to me seems like, that's a good 2 to 3 hours of work per episode. Can you talk about, I know someone that pays $800 a month to have her weekly stuff edited, but can you talk about what your costs are? And because I'm also thinking this is a total side project, and I'm probably gonna have to do it myself until the podcast makes anything for me to be able to justify that. So trying to balance editing myself versus hiring someone would be great to hear.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And thank you for telling me to charge, but this is not my day job. So
No,
I'm just doing this out of the goodness of my heart, because I want more female podcasters, because I'm tired of all the bros having
Yes.
It's
Right?
ugh.
So annoying.
Yeah, so I just want to hear more female perspectives, because I'm so over. We've heard your perspective for 5,000 years.
Aren't we all?
White dudes,
Yes.
at least. My husband's white. I mean, he's Portuguese. He's like, you're down on white dudes. I'm like, can you blame me? He's like, not really. But so in terms of my costs, so I use WeEdit, who they are in Canada, and for $359 a month, I get 5 episodes, and that includes transcripts. Not everyone starts out doing transcripts, but I wanted the SEO stuff, and I find that on my newsletter list, some people will only read the transcripts. And I'm actually hiring a new VA who's going to go through and leverage the best content and read. And all she'll have to do is go through the transcripts and, just go through those and grab that text and then create an article about it. So not everyone needs the transcripts. But in terms of hearing impaired, and if your list is only some people are only readers, that helps. So if you don't get the transcripts though, I think it's $100, $100 or $120 less. But what's interesting is I got an email. I haven't had a time to look at it, but this new service called Pippa reached out to me, and I'm going to have my VA research it, but they are doing free transcription based on artificial intelligence. So I don't know how accurate it's going to be. But I was like, oh my God, if they can do that, and they have all this other stuff that goes along with that, I was like, that could be a real game changer. And with WeEdit, what's interesting is so when I originally started with Juliet, we were splitting the $359 a month. And then when she left, obviously, I had to absorb all those costs. And so going to the seasons, now this season 2, which the theme is the feminine perspective, I did a trailer on it, and then I did 7 episodes. So they're charging me, $360, $720 for 10 episodes, but 2 of those episodes will count towards the next season, and I can freeze my account. So that's that. Then in terms of my other costs, Libsyn, which I mentioned to Erin, is it's usually $15 a month, but I pay the extra $5 to see specifically where people are downloading from. It will tell you, most people come from Apple Core Media, which is your iPhone, but then it'll show you who's coming to your website to listen to it, who's downloading from Google Play. And that's Libsyn's basically you're paying for storage and stats, and they will give you some basic stats for $15 a month. But you pay, and then they will push it out to I started pushing out to YouTube, even though I don't record the interviews with people, because half the time I'm not showered. Between this group, I'm I do not want to be on video. And sometimes the interviewers feel much more relaxed. They're like, okay, good. But I push it out to YouTube through Libsyn. I push it out to Google Play. When I get my new podcast art, it's going to go out to Spotify. And so Libsyn will push all that stuff out. And actually, WeEdit, I just send them the episodes, and then they send everything to Libsyn for me. So they do all the back end stuff. All I have to do is the interviewing, and eventually my VA is going to do the social media share with the people, because I don't clearly from Erin's question, I'm like, oh my God, I am so big picture. I gave like the overall big picture, not how to like the details of how to get started. But so those are the basic costs that I have. And that's it. But I also have my computer, and I did buy a microphone. I have the blue microphone. I can show people, and I bought a $5 pop filter. But I also use that microphone because I do online courses. And so I use that same microphone for really good quality control for the group programs as well. So it wasn't just a podcast cost per se. It was just an investment in my business.
Got it. And then seasons.
Yeah.
This is the big thing I'm debating is whether, because I'm doing mine are all interview styles. And so how many are in a season? How many seasons a year? How should I think about that?
Yeah. So here's the cool thing. You can do whatever you want. There's no right or wrong. And it was interesting too, talking to a client when she's in Scotland, and she's like, oh my God, it's so brilliant that you're moving to season. She's like, it's going to make us want you more. And I was like, I was fearful that people would stop downloading and subscribing, but I find that hasn't been the case. And what's cool is once people find a season, then they go back through all your old stuff. And then what I also have done, I took like a 2-month break to just like recalibrate, like what is the positioning of this podcast? And I just did rebroadcasts of it, and people love that. Like I rebroadcast old podcasts. So like I'm going on break again mid-February, and I'm going to come back around when I'm launching my spring program, but I will rebroadcast some of the most popular ones, or ones that I think seasonally for the winter that people need to listen to. So you can do that so that you're not taking a break. People, when they still go to subscribe, they're still going to hear you. But I find seasons to be really great. People like a theme. They like to know like what they can expect. You don't need to do themes, but that's kind of been what's been the common thread. And people are like, okay, this is what I know is I can expect from Ali and what's in this season. And I also too, in the seasons, I'm going to bring in 2 of my clients each season so they can share their stories and stuff like that. So it doesn't really matter, but I do think it's important. If you are trying to get advertisers and you're trying to go for volume, like some people who I realized that the people, I don't know if you guys know Farnoosh Torabi. She's like a financial journalist. So I was mentoring with her when I started my podcast, and she did something really interesting. She's in the business of media though. She gets paid. She's an Oprah columnist. She gets paid to do partnerships with Chase Manhattan. So like the business of media is her business. And when she first started her podcast, she did it 5 days a week just to get press around it. Now she already had contacts, right? Has tons of contacts. She was an NBC Today person, whatever. And now she's gone back to three times a week, but she's in the business of content creation. And so she does that so that people go to her for content. People are technically coming to me for content, but they're more deeply coming to me for transformation and change. So that the podcast will get them started. But so people who are in the business of content and media will probably do it all. Like they might have a viewpoint of don't miss a week because people are going to forget about you. But my view, again, my purpose is different than being a source of media itself. Did that make things more confusing or? Okay, no. Okay, good. All right. It's so business models, it's never what you think the business model is. So you have to like take a step back and like, oh, they're in the business of this. So, yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Erin.
Hi. So frequency is something that you've touched on here and there. And I know it's different for different businesses, but how often do you really need to post or publish, or however you like, how often does someone need to really do it? If it's to grow a community or grow your audience.
Yeah. So to grow a community, I mean, again, if you were to pair like a Facebook group with it, then people can have those episodes and then they can grow themselves, right? Ideally in a community, you're not the center. Like the community sustains itself. Otherwise you totally burn out, right? So if you give them enough content for fodder, you could say, hey, we're revisiting this or whatever. So I think when you're first starting out, sometimes it is helpful to have like a library, right, of episodes. So like maybe in the beginning you do every week, and maybe they vary in length, you know. And again, maybe you do these ahead of time and they drop all at the same time, because it does start to get a lot. I mean, that's why I tell people, like, really get clear on why this is going to benefit you. Otherwise, the novelty runs out pretty quickly. It's great when, you know, Juliet, I had lived in Philly, but then I'm back here in Pittsburgh, but she would tell me in Philly, people would come up to her and be like, oh my God, I listen to your podcast. That wears off like very quickly. It's great and it's helpful. But I think, and again, if you're feeling overwhelmed, you could do mini-sodes of 15 minutes, right? Sometimes I've done mini-sodes, like I did, all right, here's 5 tips to relieve your anxiety with food. I'm not going to go into the cultural conditioning, all this stuff. I'm just going to tell you, do this, this, and this. And I often sprinkle those in when you need a break, because it gives people something very tangible. And so spacing them out. And I know you asked about frequency, but that gives you some flexibility with frequency. If you know that you can go at different lengths, like there's no right or wrong way to do it. But I do think in the beginning, being consistent is important. And then once people are like, oh my God, I want to tune into Erin, and I'm thinking about, for you could have women's stories on, and people would like, that's catnip for people. They love people's stories.
Yeah.
And so that could, you could just interview people. Like, I love interviewing people because they often bring the content.
Well, I've had about 10 people in the past 2 months say to me, all separately, you have got to start a podcast. I'm like, oh, great. Like, something else I need to add to my list of things to do. So.
Well, right. And everyone will say that to you because they don't know how much work's involved, which is why I think that, it's like when you're a business owner and people tell you everything you should do, you're like, I know, now you've just stressed me out. But I think, in the beginning, what you might want to do is pitch yourself to other people's podcasts.
Yeah.
And then you have that content there. And then if you really like it, you're still getting the same benefit. You can still put that on there. And then what you could even do is, if you want to do a podcast and take a break, you could ask those people, hey, can I release this through my feed? I mean, they would love that, because again, it's cross-pollination. But sometimes it's just better to go on people's podcasts than to have one. Yeah. Oh,
Hi.
Jessica, great.
Hi.
Oh, good. You guys are also familiar with Zoom. I love it.
This is super helpful. Can you talk, so I actually have 3 if there's time. Just remember.
I can stay on for till 4:30.
Okay. One is, how to keep organized with everything, because I'm totally in overwhelm already. And then 2 is, what is the best way to invite guests to come in, like language? And then 3, you talked about pitching yourself to other people's platforms. I'm just curious if you could speak a little bit to that and how to persuade them.
Yeah. Okay. So actually, I think 1, 2, and 3 are very similar. In terms of staying organized, what helps me, so I think life is energy management, not time management. So what drains me is like the little things of having to edit, doing the mechanical stuff. So it's really easy for me that's why seasons can be very helpful, because then you can stay organized. I know I get the constraints of the production team. So we edit, if it's going out the following week, they have to have that podcast by Friday of the week before, so that they can edit and whatnot. So that kind of drives everything. When I've done this, when I've moved to seasons, I knew that it was going to drop the week before New Year's. And so I did all the recording in November and December. So then I could take the time and just like because people hadn't told me yes or no. My clients were like, yes. And some people moved around, but it gave me enough flexibility because guests will reschedule. They're busy as well. So I think the big thing with staying organized is always give yourself more of a time buffer than you think you're going to need. But then don't like recreate the wheel. Like I do intros for mine. And I've recently saying like, here's why I wanted to have this person on. Here's why I want you to pay attention. And I've gotten better at like my husband's an editor. He calls it the lingerie theory. Like, don't give people everything at once, like that curiosity gap. So that intro is also the blog post I use. I don't recreate a blog post and an intro. And I try to do it right after the interview because it's fresh in my mind. And then I just record that intro. And because I've written it down to write it, then that's that blog post. So in terms of organization, it's the deadlines for me drive everything, but knowing that I have someone who's going to do those little details. And then in terms of like an intro and outro, I'm also doing a huge repositioning of my company and my brand right now. I hired a copywriter to just do the intro and outro for me. And that's recorded and that stays in the, in We Edits, in my folders for We Edit. So they always know the process is intro, outro, plus my little context. And again, listen to some of your favorite podcasts, because sometimes people will bring a quote rather than an intro. You can do whatever you want, but for me, going back and finding the quotes took a lot of time, and it just wasn't something that I wanted. It was making me unorganized, I guess is what you can say. And then the cool thing about on the back end of sharing them and promoting them on social media is these are timeless pieces. So I'm in the middle of a program launch right now, and I have 3 episodes that I have not been able to promote. When my VA comes on next week, she's going to be able to promote all of those, and it doesn't matter because it's great content that is evergreen, I guess, as they would say in the content marketing world. So if you fall behind, and even if you don't get to like a week, like no one's going to like be like abandon ship, I think that's an important thing. So does that answer kind of about organization? Is just you get into a rhythm of it that's super helpful. And in terms of pitching people and then pitching yourself. So this is a great acronym for everybody. It's called the DIME method. And it's very short. People are overwhelmed, but it will give people a hook for not only getting you onto podcasts, but also getting people to come on. So DIME stands for, first is the DI is the dilemma. What is the dilemma? Like, why are we talking about this? So, and I'll give you an example. So I just did a podcast on freedom from the downward eating spiral. And my process has 5 components to it. But in traditional emotional eating, they will tell you, you have a craving, there's a trigger, a craving, and then you eat. And they will tell you from a trigger standpoint, go take a walk, go breathe deeply, ask yourself if you want it. And in my model, it's like, no, there's a trigger that actually makes you a victim to the trigger. In my model, there's a trigger, there's a story about the trigger, there's a stress response behaviors, and then you eat. So in my dilemma is like, the reason that people are continuing to binge eat and overeat is because the model has been incorrect. And so my message is, here's the pieces that are missing. And you always want it to be counterintuitive. So for example, one of my friends who's a coach, we often hear in the space, it's lonely at the top, right? Like as you get to a certain career level, it's really lonely at the top. And she's pitching a piece that I helped her with of like, why it's good to be lonely at the top. And it's like, oh wait, what? Like, in PR, they say it's not dog eats man. It's like, when does the man eat the dog? Like man bites dog, like what's going on? So that's the dilemma. And then the messaging is like kind of 1 or 2 bullet points of why you're the person to deliver this message, right? So for me, I'm like, look, that never worked for me personally. And here's what my 10 years of academic research and client success that no one else can get has taught me. So that's kind of the credibility and saying it in a clear way. And then giving a concrete example. That's the E in the dilemma. So what's an example of this? And in my podcast, I explained how like, okay, I had cancer as a child, and that uncertainty made me feel like things were life or death. And then because I never healed that, I started to abstract everything that was uncertain, felt like it was such high stakes. And that's actually what was the root of why I was eating, had nothing to do with food itself, but my own unresolved trauma. And so then it brings it home for people. And so if you can do that with people, and also like if you want to pitch someone, like I just pitched this woman, she wrote the book, Women in Desire, Beyond Wanting to Be Wanted. And the book was 18 years ago that came out. But I said to her, look, I work with people a lot on what you're talking about. And I think with the Me Too movement and all the stuff that's coming out, it's a sign that we haven't made much progress, and I think what you're talking about is more relevant than ever. So the dilemma creates an urgency of why now, et cetera. And then your messaging is kind of your unique point of view or angle, and what you can bring or what you'd like them to talk about. And usually if you're complimentary of someone's work and it shows that it's not even complimentary, that you've taken an interest in their work, they are so happy to come on. The good people I found, because they like talking about this stuff because they know they're going to learn from you and they're going to, get to increase their audience. So, do you have more questions, or is that helpful? Okay.
I can't think of anything at the moment, but thank you so much. That's super helpful.
Yeah, and I'm happy again to do another thing on the dime method because it's really easy and simple. And the goal is to get someone to say, tell me more, not to get someone to say yes right away. I mean, if they say yes right away, fantastic. But when you're pitching guests, like I give them a link to sign. I was like, here's what it would be. Here's my schedule. If you can't make those times, I will find something better for you. We can do video, or I prefer the video, but if we can do just phone. So I tend to like, especially the higher profile guests, I consider higher profile. They're not media stars, but they're like really smart and good at what they do. I've never really had one person say no, except that person whose book had just come out and she was doing NPR and stuff. So I get it.
Yeah, I think learning more about the dime would be amazing too at some point. I know we have like a limited amount on this call, but that would be great.
Yeah, no problem. Because remember too, people need content these days. Like, I think a lot of times people are like, am I bothering people? Are they going to like this? And it's like, everybody needs content. So if you serve it up and make it as easy as possible, it's just like, yes. And I always think too, if you know someone who knows someone, that intro, like I'm about to pitch myself to some pretty big podcasts and I know people know these people and I'm going to say, hey, can you intro me and I'll follow up right away. It makes it obviously easier.
I think that is one last question I have is like, how do you find people to pitch to?
Yeah. So for me, I'm in the health space and it's this interesting space because most health people aren't behavior change experts or people who are experts at behavior change take very like simple coaching approach to it. And I should say simple coaching, but it's all about what's conscious, not what's unconscious. So I look at who's tangential, right? Who's in my space, but not talking about the right thing. So there's a guy, his name's Chris Kresser, and he is very smart. He's very researched. I know we have the same audiences because my clients often send me his articles and I send my clients those articles that he writes. And so he's very fascinated by behavior change right now. He's actually started his own health coaching program. And so he's really into positive psychology, motivational interviewing. So I'm going to say to him, hey, that stuff will get you started, but I have some ideas about what gets people through the hard part of change, of when the novelty wears off. So that's going to be huge value to him because he's an acupuncturist. He's a functional medicine expert. He's not an expert on the change process, which I am. Jillian Michaels, right? She's like, I'll probably pitch her one day. She's very traditional. But she's a huge name. And so I'll probably listen to a couple of her episodes on behavior change and say, hey, I found this episode really interesting. And I think this is a point that would be really fascinating for you guys to explore. Like I often say with people like that, like, oh, we all know it's emotional, but people can't give people a very chiseled way of understanding the emotional stuff. And I've been able to do that. And then, if you've been in media before saying, like, I've been in the Wall Street Journal. I did 4 years on the Today or on the 10 show in Philly, other media credits include, and that unfortunately in the media, a lot of times PR, like TV doesn't necessarily get you big sales, but it gives you credibility. And the media is all about saying like, oh, this person vouched for you. Okay. It's easier for me to trust you too. I mean, it's just, right or wrong, it's just how it goes. It's like the devil you need to dance with. Yeah. So any other questions?
Can we email you if something comes up?
Yeah. I'm in the middle of lunch, so I may not get back right away, but I would love to help anyway when I can. But I think in terms of podcasting and pitching yourself, like, again, people need content. And if you just do a little bit of effort, I am shocked at how I've gotten pitches where people clearly have never listened to my podcast and they've sent me their whole life story and it's all about them. And I'm just like, I can't get through this email, let alone you haven't done your research. So if you put a little bit of effort in, it goes so far. And I'm sure everyone in Dreamers and Doers, your idea of effort is tip top. Like, it's yeah. So, and you can always start with the smaller shows. And remember, people say no, often it's not now. It doesn't mean no forever. And I just can't stress how much people need content these days. And so if you can serve it up really easily, you're just making their life easier. Yeah. Erin or Slava, any questions?
No, I think I have enough here to
Yeah.
to last a while.
Yeah, and Erin too, I always tell people, like, think of like minimal viable product for a podcast. Like, what if I just go on my iPhone and record 20 minutes and send this out to my clients? What'd you think of that? Be honest. Like, how was the sound quality? What, people will tell you if you're asking for honest feedback.
Okay.
Seriously, I would practice just like freestyling, because then people might say, hey, what question, you might say, what questions did you have from this or something?
Okay.
Everyone has to start somewhere.
That is true.
Yeah, I look back at, I'm redoing my website, and I'm bringing some of my like first clips from when I was on NBC, and it like cringe, and I was like, wow, I've come really far. That's the upside. Like, I didn't have, oh my God, it's ugh. But the content is so good.
I hate listening to myself or looking back at stuff.
Yeah, I don't listen to my podcasts at all. Like, people are like, how do you, like, my clients come on, they're like, I didn't want to hear my voice. I'm like, don't listen to it. I don't, I think it's so important for women to get into this space, because I'm so tired of more of the same. And I think other women are too. And if you guys go and She Podcasts, you will see the nichiest podcasts, like prehistoric history related to gardening. Like, it's so crazy. There's an audience out there for everything. So yeah, and we're hungry for stories right now of triumph. All right. Anybody else? Slava, you've been kind of quiet. You're on the computer, so you can unmute yourself, or you can do it. Just want to make sure you get anything answered. I know we covered a lot. Again, I tend to go wide instead of deep, so if we need to do something follow up.
Thank you so much. This is incredibly helpful.
Oh, good. Yeah, once you guys let it settle, you'll get your own answers. There's no right or wrong. All right. I'm going to unmute everybody that's still here. So going once. Is that waving, or do you have a question?
No, that's a thank you.
Oh, yeah, no problem. Thanks for tuning in. Slava, a question at all? Oh, maybe she's away from her desk. Okay. All right. Have a good one, everyone. Take care. Bye.